and welcome back, everyone. That was a very intriguing and thought-provoking first session there. I'm going to build upon that in this presentation a bit with work that I'm going to be talking about that colleagues and I have been pulling together over the last few months, looking at developing a robust soil health indicator framework for Europe. I am Dr. Grant Campbell. I'm from the University of Aberdeen. I'm working as a research fellow in soil health modelling, working with Pete Smith's team at the university. So that's just a little bit of a background for you. So just to sort of set the stage, if you will, there's a lot of discussion in the academic literature about the need for soil assessment frameworks. But why are we needing soil assessment frameworks? Well, our soil is continuously being assessed and evaluated. It's been looked at many different lenses and guises from all over, from all kinds of stakeholders at all kinds of scales. More uses of soil are being considered all the time. There's a greater variety of stakeholders that are also being involved with soil, not just farmers, not just policymakers. Business sector is becoming more and more prominent in this area, finance as well. So much more people are really capturing and getting involved with what soil means to them and what it's all about. There are so many evolving concepts as well that link across soil assessments, from legislation and policy to also socio-economy, which I mentioned earlier on. But crucially, societal priorities are moving in terms of how soil assessment frameworks are being looked at and changed. And things like the Sustainable Development Goals shape that on a regular basis and continue to do so. So here's a few kind of current framings that range within the soil assessment literature. These are not extensive, though there is more things than here, but there are a few that I've just captured in this list. We've heard a lot of authors and commentators look at soil quality, and that really has been sort of throughout time. But more and more, we're sort of looking at this paradigm of soil health, really kind of building upon work that, Buneman did in the sort of late 2010s, and also work that has been built upon by authors such as Peter Lehman in the 2020s. But there's also other framings that need to be appreciated as well, such as soil protection, the work of Bloom in the early 2000s, and work by Phil Haygarth and Carol Ritz in the late 2000s, looking at natural capital and ecosystem services. One thing to note here is that these framings, and along with some others as well, have one thing in common, and that is that they convey the concept of quality. And in the next few slides, I'm going to unpack what we mean by quality. So what can quality as a term mean and refer to? Well, in terms of the Cambridge English Dictionary, quality can refer to three aspects. It can refer to the excellence, which means the degree or distinction or superiority of something, a standard, in essence, how good or bad something is, or a characteristic describing a feature of something. And this is something that's very much been talked about in soil science on so many different levels, whether we're looking at properties, whether we're looking at types, whether we're looking at other aspects too, policy being another one. Let's unpack this a little bit more. So there was work done in the early 1990s by Harvey and Green that looked at 5 categories of quality. And this is them here: exception, perfection, fit or fitness for purpose, value for money or value assessment, and transformative. And in the next couple of slides, I'm going to unpack this a little bit more. So discussing the paradigm of quality. So when we mean by an exception, we mean something that is distinctive and exclusive. Think of a bottle of champagne, high-end market, very attractive proposition to get, very high quality item. But in terms of soil science, we are not really at this kind of stage that we have parameters or at setup, which is distinctive and exclusive. As Tom was sort of mentioning earlier on, we're sort of trying to move in that direction, but it is going to be very tough to get there, certainly at this moment in time. There is no specification or criteria fully established without a standard. We need to then look at other ways of which quality can be looked at. So if we look at trying to attain a high standard, we look at making things that are distinctive or exclusive for all but a few exceptions. But we're still wanting to get to a very high standard, but that can be almost unattainable. But we are looking at things like standards or benchmarking as a basis for this. We're also looking at, as we move further down or further across the category scheme, if you will, the art of perfection. So we want to look at setting a minimum standard, looking at kind of like zero defects. So if something is not accepted, it is rejected. And minimum standard has to be reached. And it has to be free from errors. But there is also consistency, which also is very similar to this, where we have to meet a minimum standard and developing a quality culture that gets things right first time. And things like monitoring and indicators are linked in here, things like thresholds, benchmarks, tolerances, but eliminating large errors as well. And then you sort of move down the scheme a little bit. So from the sort of champagne quality that I was talking about earlier on, you're sort of looking at now towards like bottled water in a supermarket, whereby you're looking for something that is related to purpose or use, looking at assessment performance metrics, something that is going to be suitable for the majority of us. But there is also other thoughts towards quality that link towards the economy. So value for money. How valuable, talking from a soil science point of view, how valuable is our land? An assessment in relation to cost, using things like cost-benefit analysis, life cycle analysis is being used commonly in the academic literature. And I mentioned transformative in terms of characteristics a couple of slides back, looking at things such as measurements and change of nature. So changes in specific properties, changes in specific nature or environment. So that is also some things to just think about when you're looking at this term quality. What do we actually mean by it? Well, it's not quite as simple as you might think. So we then, in essence, have to try to link this back to soil science in some way. And there was authors in the 2010s that looked at this total quality framework, Beckford in 2010, looking to seek to achieve continual quality improvement. And when I think of this, I immediately think of the Olympic Games, when they think of this faster, fitter, stronger, where you want to try to get better all the time so that you can aim to get that bronze, silver, and gold medal. Now, whether we get that in soil science or equivalent will be interesting to find out. But in terms of soil science, the quality goal, in terms of what we're talking about in this neck of the woods, must be defined. And for work that Arwen was talking about earlier on, we're looking at hoping to achieve sustainably managed soils by 2050 as part of the EU mission. And to do this, we need to make sure that we help select the quality and appropriate indicators and monitoring framework that is suitable for this. And ultimately, civilians will need to understand how actions or interventions are deployed, because at the end of the day, they're going to be the people that's going to be impacted by what we decide to do. So I hope you can read this slide, but I'm going to break it down anyway. So in essence, at the top here, we have the defining of a goal at the top, number one. And then this is what I was talking about earlier on, achieving healthy soils by 2050. And then number two here, monitoring and assessment, looking at this total quality management, soil descriptors approach that's been used in the soil monitoring law. And then we have a list of ideas, which I'm going to break down a little bit more into things that have been talked about and are available in the academic literature, but also something that we need to think about when we or our stakeholders are looking at for assessing soil quality or quality assessment in essence. So I'll break this down a little bit cleaner, if you will. Let's start with fitness for purpose, which looks at quality framed in terms of the extent to which a soil meets the specifications of any user for a defined purpose. So what do we mean by this? Well, basically, we're looking at thresholds that are being looked at for the purpose of what a circumstance or a customer or a user is looking for. And this can be done relative to scale with thresholds for indicators. And this is mostly looking at or targeted at soil managers And an example of this is the Campbell Soil Health Report, which Tom was talking about earlier on as a basis. So that's one avenue we can explore with this. The next avenue is really linked towards more what the EU is looking at, and this free from degradation approach. And I mentioned earlier on about this absence of degradation, a binary choice. Either your soil is degraded or it's not. So what it means is that the thresholds for degraded or non-degraded soils must be defined from the outset. I mentioned the interpretation is of a binary choice to differentiate this. But in terms of the stakeholder target, it's different from the previous example because we're really looking at policymakers in the first instance. And work by Panos and others at the GRC, really looking at the EU Soil Observatory dashboard and looking at soil degradation, linking a lot of information together that is going to try to make better understanding at the member state level, but also can link across to maybe more specific level further down the line. The third option on this list is external benchmarking, which looks at the comparison of performance against best in class to drive continual improvement. And this goes back to my thought about earlier on that I was discussing regarding the Olympic Games. So in essence, it's the boundary for the upper percentile to be defined, considered best practice. And what I mean by this, and this is a piece of work that was done by a colleague of mine, Chris Feeney, and others at the UK Centre of Ecology and Hydrology. And what they're looking at is, this is an example for soil organic matter. And if you are in this curve, this distribution curve for a particular property, if you are in the red zone, you are below what is defined typical range and action is required. If you're in the orange area, then you're in the typical range, which is okay, but you need to make sure that you keep working at it to make sure that you don't fall into the red category. So that's the think about there. That's the conservative approach. Where you want to really be is in the upper part of the curve, in the blue category. And this is opportunities for farmers to look at others in their area or in their region to see what they are doing so that you can get some ideas on how you can improve your soils in that areas as well. So that's something to think about, going back to my Olympic Games analogy with this faster, fitter, stronger, to try to get to that upper level of the curve, or in this distribution, if you will, for a particular area. And this is just for soil organic matter, by the way. This could be done for any other property or an index potentially going forward. I think this could possibly be a way forward with that. Now, I mentioned earlier on that soils are being utilized a lot more and being interested a lot more by the finance and business sector. So value assessment has to come into play, where quality is equated with the level of specification that is directly related to a value. And this goes back to, again, the target stakeholders of policymakers, whereby we're looking at how much of a value or cost benefit is something that happens to your landscape going to benefit future investment or return on future investment. This is relative to value specification, if you will. It can be quite arbitrary, but there is work that is being done in this area. And this is just an example of value assessment, a graphic here, whereby you really want to look at how much value your whole ecosystem costs, if you like, looking at the extent and condition of your ecosystem, but also linking it across to how various ecosystem services are going to help make sure that society benefits, both economically and physically, but also looking as well at how it impacts individuals and social well-being. And this again links a little bit back to what Tom was talking about in the opening session. So I'm coming into my summary now, but the thing I'm trying to look at here is that when we're looking at these assessments and when we're looking at quality as a whole, we really need to look back at scale and stakeholders. I mentioned there that soil quality frameworks can be categorized into 4 key approaches: fitness for purpose, which I was sort of talking about earlier on, about trying to get your area towards a better quality of state. Free from degradation, that binary approach: is your soil degraded or not. The extent external benchmarking, where are you in terms of a distribution curve between your land versus the land or the area in your particular member state or district? And value assessment, looking at how worthy or economically valuable your land is as well. And it all comes back to making sure that a clear definition of quality is important, because we're all about discussing about future ways for looking at better soil health, and AI, I think, will have a big factor in that, in a huge way, I'm sure. But effective communication and decision-making will be important in that regard. That is me at an end. I want to acknowledge the people on this slide, including my advisor and mentor, Pete Smith at the University of Aberdeen, but also a range of others across the AI for Soil Health team who have given me a lot of advice and ideas across the project. And thanks very much for listening, and I welcome any questions you may have.